Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today, we're going down a bit of a winding path.
Sounds fun. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, we're starting with something I think we can all relate to. Printer frustrations.
Oh, the bane of modern existence.
You got that right. But then we're going to see if we can connect that to AI.
Okay. Now that's a twist I didn't see coming.
I know, right? We'll also be looking at this really fascinating problem called the multi-armed bandit.
Multi-armed what now?
I know, got a kind of catchy name, right? Don't worry, we'll break it all down.
All right, I'm ready when you are. Let's dive in.
Okay, so printers. Where do we even begin?
Honestly, I think most of us have a love-hate relationship with those things.
Totally. I mean, they can be super convenient when they're actually working.
Yeah, but when they decide to act up, oh man, it's like they know exactly when to cause the most chaos.
Right, like when you have an important document to print, and suddenly, paper jam. Or it just starts printing gibberish.
Ugh, or that dreaded low toner message when you absolutely need to print something right that second.
Exactly. Our source for this deep dive actually describes it perfectly. Misalignments, breakdowns,
Yeah.
like the whole 9 yards of printer problems.
It's almost comical how much power these machines seem to have over us, you know?
You think it's more than just printers, though? Like, is it a reflection of our relationship with technology in general?
That's a really interesting point. We've become so dependent on technology for, well, pretty much everything.
Yeah, and that dependence can definitely make us vulnerable when things go wrong.
Exactly. And maybe the printer, with all its little quirks and its tendency to break down at the worst possible moment, is kind of a microcosm of that whole dynamic.
Like a love-hate relationship with the very devices we depend on. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about something a little more complex. Moore's Law and its impact on AI. Have you heard of Moore's Law?
Of course. Though maybe not everyone listening has.
Right, good point. Can you give us a quick explanation?
Sure. So Moore's law basically says that the number of transistors that can be squeezed onto a microchip doubles roughly every 2 years. And what that means is computing power increases exponentially over time.
And it's been surprisingly accurate for decades, right?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how well it's held up.
And obviously, this exponential growth in computing power has played a huge role in the development of artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. Early AI research was really limited by the available computing power. But as transistors got smaller and smaller and we could fit more of them onto a chip, AI research started to take off.
I mean, think about the complex algorithms that power things like digital assistants or self-driving cars. Those wouldn't be possible without that massive increase in computing power that Moore's Law predicted.
Exactly. The source we're looking at actually mentions those as prime examples of how far we've come. But what's even more interesting is that it's not just a one-way street.
You mean how AI is now pushing the limits of what we can do with computer chips?
Exactly. It's this really cool feedback loop. The demand for more powerful AI drives the development of even more powerful hardware, and that in turn makes even more complex AI possible.
So each advancement fuels the other.
Precisely. But there is a potential roadblock here. There's been a lot of talk about Moore's law potentially slowing down.
Yeah, because we're reaching the physical limits of how small we can actually make transistors.
Right. We're getting to a point where cramming more transistors onto a chip might not be possible in the same way it has been in the past.
So what happens if Moore's Law as we know it just stops?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But it doesn't necessarily mean progress will just grind to a halt.
Okay, so are there potential alternatives? Like what happens when we hit that wall?
There are some really exciting new avenues being explored. For example, some researchers are working on what are called neuromorphic chips.
Neuromorphic chips. Those sound pretty futuristic.
They kind of are. They're designed to mimic the way the human brain works. And the idea is that they could process information much more efficiently than our traditional computer chips, which could open up all sorts of new possibilities for AI.
That's super interesting. Are there other approaches being developed?
Another big one is quantum computing.
Ah, yes, quantum computing.
Yeah.
It seems like it has the potential to revolutionize so many different fields.
It really does. And AI is definitely one of them. Quantum computers harness the principles of quantum mechanics to do calculations in ways that are just impossible for regular computers.
So even if Moore's Law does slow down, it sounds like the quest for more computing power and more sophisticated AI is far from over.
Definitely not over. It might just take some different forms than we're used to.
Okay, before we move on, there's one more topic I want to touch on that seems completely different. Game theory. Can you tell us a little about that?
Sure. Game theory is basically a way of studying how people make decisions when the outcome depends on what other people do.
So it's about strategic decision-making in situations where you're interacting with others.
Exactly. It's all about competition and cooperation and figuring out the best strategy to achieve your goals.
And how does this multi-armed bandit thing fit into all of this? It sounds a bit like a casino game.
It does, doesn't it? And in a way, it kind of is. Imagine you're in a casino and you're faced with a row of slot machines.
Each with a different payout rate, right?
Yeah, but you don't know what the payout rates are. You have a limited number of pulls, and you want to maximize your winnings. So how do you figure out which machine is the best without wasting all your pulls on bad machines?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It seems like you'd have to balance trying out different machines to see which ones pay out better with sticking to the ones that seem to be working.
Exactly. It's a classic example of what's called optimal stopping. How do you make the best decision when you don't have all the information? And that tension between exploring new options and exploiting the ones you already know about is at the heart of the multi-armed bandit problem.
I'm starting to see how this could be relevant beyond just gambling.
Oh, absolutely. This problem pops up all over the place. Think about A/B testing for websites where you're trying to figure out which version of a web page leads to more conversions, or figuring out which ads to show different people online. Even pricing strategies can involve this kind of thinking.
So it's about finding the optimal arm, the best choice, when you're dealing with limited information.
That's really interesting.
It is, isn't it?
You know, it's funny. We started with something as mundane as printers, and we've already stumbled into this whole web of interconnected ideas.
It's true. And that's what I love about these deep dives. You never know where they're going to take you. And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to unpack here.
Totally. So let's go back to Moore's law for a minute. We were talking about it potentially slowing down. What are some of the broader implications of that? I mean, what happens if it just stops completely? Well, it's definitely something a lot of experts are thinking about. As we discussed, Moore's law has been this driving force behind all the progress we've seen in computing, especially when it comes to AI.
Right. AI has really benefited from all that extra computing power.
Exactly. So if that pace of advancement slows down significantly, it could have a ripple effect across a lot of industries.
So we're not just talking about, like, slower computers and smartphones.
Nope. It goes way deeper than that. It could potentially impact the development of new, more powerful AI applications. Things like, oh, I don't know, drug discovery, personalized medicine, climate modeling. All these fields rely on increasingly powerful computers to process massive amounts of data.
Wow. Yeah. That's a lot to consider.
It is. It really makes you appreciate how much we've come to rely on this constant exponential growth in computing power. But, you know, it's not all doom and gloom.
Wow. Why is that?
Well, humans are pretty ingenious, right? Even if we do hit a wall with the classic Moore's law, it's likely that new innovations will emerge, new ways of thinking about computation.
Like those neuromorphic and quantum computer approaches we touched on earlier.
Exactly. Those are just two examples of the really cool avenues being explored. And it's possible these new approaches won't just compensate for the slowing down of Moore's law, but they might actually lead to entirely new breakthroughs that we can't even imagine yet.
Okay, so maybe there's hope for the future of AI, even if Moore's law fizzles out.
I definitely think so. We might just have to get a little more creative.
I like that attitude.
Yeah.
So how about we shift gears back to game theory for a bit? I'm really curious to hear more about how it connects to everything we've been talking about.
You got it. You know, when you think about it, AI systems, especially the ones based on machine learning, are constantly making decisions based on the data they're fed.
They're trying to find the best solutions, the best outcomes, just like that gambler trying to figure out which slot machine pays out the most.
That's a great analogy. AI algorithms have to balance exploring new possibilities with exploiting what they've already learned.
Just like in the multi-armed bandit problem, right?
Exactly. They need to figure out when to stick with what seems to be working and when to try something new in the hopes of finding a better approach. And as AI becomes even more sophisticated and is given more responsibility, you know, making decisions in uncertain situations becomes even more crucial.
Because the stakes get higher.
Exactly. They need to be able to adapt, to learn from their mistakes, to constantly refine their strategies, just like a skilled gambler would.
It's like AI is playing this high-stakes game where the rules are always changing and the risks are really high.
You could say that. And just as Moore's law has been this driving force behind the growth of AI, the insights we get from game theory are helping to shape the development of smarter, more adaptable, and ultimately more effective AI.
So we've got this interconnected web of ideas here. Printers, Moore's law, AI, game theory. And they all tie back to this fundamental challenge of making decisions in a world where we don't have all the answers.
That's a great way to put it. I think it highlights something really important. Even though we often strive for certainty and control, so much of life is about navigating uncertainty.
It's about making the best choices we can, even when we don't have all the information. And that's true whether we're talking about choosing which printer to buy or developing advanced AI systems that could have a huge impact on society.
And maybe, just maybe, the key to success in both scenarios is learning to embrace that uncertainty and finding ways to thrive despite it.
I love that. So how can we actually apply these insights from game theory to real-world situations? Like, how can we get better at making decisions when we don't know what the future holds?
That's a great question. It feels like we've been on this whirlwind tour of ideas today, from printers to AI to game theory, and somehow it all seems connected.
It is pretty amazing how these seemingly unrelated topics can intersect and give us new insights.
I know, right? And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that whether we realize it or not, we're constantly facing decisions that involve a certain level of uncertainty. Absolutely. And it's especially true in our increasingly tech-driven world.
It's like life itself is one giant multi-armed bandit problem. We're always trying to figure out which path to take, which choice to make, but we never really know for sure what the outcome will be.
Exactly. And that can feel kind of overwhelming sometimes, especially with how fast technology is changing. So how can we become more savvy decision makers in this complex landscape?
That's what I want to know. Give us the wisdom.
Well, I think it starts with cultivating a healthy dose of skepticism and critical thinking.
So don't just accept everything at face value.
Exactly. Question your assumptions, think about different perspectives, and be open to changing your mind as you learn more.
It's that balance of exploration and exploitation again, isn't it?
You got it. It applies to so much more than just slot machines. And when it comes to technology, staying informed is key.
So like reading articles, listening to podcasts, talking to experts.
Exactly. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to make choices that align with your values and goals.
Because at the end of the day, technology is a tool.
It is. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad. It's up to us to decide how we want to use it.
That's a great point. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've gone from printer frustrations to the future of AI and how to make better decisions in an uncertain world.
And hopefully we've shown that even topics that seem completely random can actually be connected in really fascinating ways.
I think we did. And if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive, it's that even though the world is becoming increasingly complex, we still have the power to make informed choices that can shape our own lives and the future of society.
Well said. So stay curious, keep exploring, and never be afraid to ask questions.
That's great advice. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this episode. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed the journey.
We'll see you next time.
Until then, keep those minds engaged and those printers running smoothly.